Hello again, and congratulations to all of you who are still here at the Planet stage. Our final session of today is going to be looking at how we can decarbonize industry. Typically, industry, whether we talk about steel or cement or chemicals or ceramics, has been seen as one of the harder to abate sectors. And we have all focused perhaps more on other areas such as electricity and transport. However, things are changing, both in terms of external expectations and internal action. And I am thrilled that we have a great group of knowledgeable experts to talk us through the innovations needed for industrial sectors to transition to net zero. Once again, if you want to tweet during the session, please use the @CogX Festival Twitter handle or use the CogX 2021 hashtag. But without further ado, I'm going to hand over to my friend Sherif, co-founder of Carbon Re, who is going to guide us through this conversation. Sherif, over to you.
Thank you very much, Pete, and hello everyone. It's an absolute pleasure to be here and back at CogX. My name is Sherif Elsayed-Ali. I am co-founder and CEO of Carbon Re. We are an artificial intelligence startup based out of the UK, working with foundation industries such as cement and steel to enable them to decarbonize. I have the immense pleasure today of really moderating a session with two fantastic leaders from the industry. But before I introduce them, I just wanted to first maybe give a word or two about the cement and steel industries. Cement and steel are the two largest produced materials in the world. We're talking about hundreds of millions of tons produced by some of the largest producers, such as LafargeHolcim for cement and ArcelorMittal for steel. Whilst we people who regularly come to CogX, used to be hearing talk about technology and technology innovation, perhaps may not associate technology innovation with industries like cement and steel, but I firmly believe that over the next 10 to 15 years, we're going to see a whole lot of innovation, technology innovation coming from these sectors. And today we're going to hear about some of the things that are coming down the line from our guests. These are Magali Anderson, who is Chief Sustainability Innovation Officer at LafargeHolcim, an engineer by training, and spent a long time in Schlumberger and other very large engineering firms. And Irina Gorbounova, who is General Manager, Group Mergers and Acquisition at ArcelorMittal. Both are leaders in the industries focused on decarbonization and future-led innovation. So I would like to really welcome you both today. Absolute pleasure to have you both in this discussion. And perhaps starting with Irina, we'd love to hear about you, about your work, and about ArcelorMittal's decarbonization strategies and the key opportunities you see in this area.
Sure, thank you, Sherif. Good evening, everyone. My name is Irina Gorbanova, and I'm a General Manager of Mergers and Acquisitions of ArcelorMittal and leading the XCAR Innovation Fund that we recently launched, and I'll talk more about in this discussion. I'm very pleased to speak at this conference focused on sustainability and innovation and discussing such an important subject as decarbonization of steel. I'm very passionate about decarbonization of steelmaking and a broader commitment to sustainability, and has been working on these initiatives for a number of years. Let me talk about decarbonization policy of our group. Just to start with the statistics, for every ton of steel we produce, we emit roughly 2 tons of CO2. So being a leading steel company translates into an enormous carbon footprint, but also presents us with an excellent opportunity to make an impact. As a leading steelmaker, we have made the pledge to become carbon neutral by 2050 and reduce our carbon emissions by 30% by 2030. And this, of course, requires significant efforts and investments. For many years, we focused on developing innovative solutions and technologies to reduce carbon emissions. And I'm very pleased that earlier this year, we announced XCAR brand. This is the first sustainability umbrella brand in the steel industry that really captures all of our carbon reduction initiatives and green innovation projects under the same umbrella. There are 3 distinct initiatives and products that we launched on the XCAR Those are green steel certificates, recycled and renewably produced steel, and XCAR innovation funds. I'll talk briefly about all three of those initiatives. So green certificates is really our industry first green steel certificates, which will allow customers to report an equivalent reduction in their Scope 3 emissions in accordance with the Greenhouse Gas Protocol. We have several decarbonization initiatives on the way from our breakthrough projects, Torero and Carbalist. I can briefly explain you about them. So Torero is, we take a wood waste, and through terrification process, we produce biocoal, which we then feed into the blast furnace, replacing fossil coal to produce, and we capture the off gases from the blast furnace and produce bioethanol through the biofermentation. So that's an example of smart carbon route, what we call, and through this process we save a lot of CO2 emissions, and those emissions we can pass, or those savings we can pass on to the customers in the form of green certificates. The second initiative under the XCAR brand is recycled and renewably produced steel made from the recycled steel. So we take scrap, we recycle scrap, and we use renewable energy through the electrical arc furnace route to produce a steel with a significantly reduced CO2 footprint. It can go as low as 300 kilograms per ton of the finished steel produced. And the third initiative, the one which I'm particularly passionate and excited about, is XCAR Innovation Fund, which we launched in March this year. The objective of the fund is to invest in companies developing breakthrough technologies that will accelerate the steel industry transition to carbon neutrality. And I think that was a brief introduction of our decarbonization strategy. Over to you, Sherif.
Thank you very much, Irina. It's always amazing kind of hearing about steel, and you know, again with cement is one of the common characteristics among them, and among other foundation industries, as they're called in the UK, is that they require very high heats in general. And I guess there's a difference there with the electric arc furnace, but generally speaking, primary steel making, cement production require very high heats. We're talking about 1500 degrees Celsius, and that is a big source of the emissions. And that is also why one of the several reasons why they are generally considered hard to abate sectors, because it is hard to do without those. So with that, Magali, perhaps we'd love to hear from you about what LafargeHolcim. LafargeHolcim is the world's largest producer of cement. You have I believe over 150 plants across the world. It'd be fantastic to hear from you as well about your initiatives and plans.
Yes, thank you. Well, first of all, good morning, good afternoon, everybody. I'm very happy to be here in CogX to share the view on the famous hard to abate sector. So first of all, a couple of words about myself. So as you mentioned, Sherif, I come from the oil and gas industry, and I was in a very operational roles. I am an engineer. So when Jan Jenisch, our CEO, offered me the job of Chief Sustainability Officer, then I did innovation later at the heart of the executive committee, it was really a lifetime opportunity to truly make a difference. And it was very clear for me that we had to do it. And we had to do it scientifically and with rigor, because as you said, it's technical and it's difficult. So what we did in the last 18 months is first, we signed the business ambition for 1.5 degree scenario, where basically we commit to net zero, but that for me was not good enough, because that's a long-term vision. What was even more important was to partner with Science Based Target Initiative and validate the 2030 targets, so that we look at what we do as of today and not in the next 30 years or whatever. And so we have set our 2030 target, which looks at about reducing 20% our CO2 intensity. Knowing that we have reduced since 1990 28%, so it's a journey that we had already started a long time ago. But by putting sustainability at the heart of the decision making of the company, we created an acceleration to do it. And we are also working with SBTi to the roadmap all the way to net zero, which today doesn't exist for the cement sector. What's amazing was to see in the company the motivation and how everybody is working with it. From the financial people, we were one of the first companies to do a sustainability-linked bond, which basically say that if by 2030 we are not reaching our target, then it will cost us a few millions. And that's important because we all know that the person who holds the CapEx is a finance person. So I need the support of the CFO to be with me. But also we are looking at how to decarbonize. So I don't know if you want me to go into details now. Maybe I wait a little bit to answer your question on the heat, but that's right. When you will look at the cement industry, we have two big emissions we have to tackle. One is how do we remove the CO2 that is used to heat our kiln? So that's about 1,500 degrees roughly, and it's replacing fossil fuel. But then the second part, which is the other 60 to 70%, is the limestone that is being heat up during the kiln. During that process is emitting that CO2. So replacing the fuel will not be good enough. And I will stop there to leave a little bit of suspense for the rest of the discussion.
Thank you. And that actually leads me perhaps my first question. One of the things to note is that the steel and cement are, we said at the beginning, but there are billions of tons produced every year. And they're used from everything from buildings to roads to bridges to schools, hospitals, workplaces, and homes. And there's very little in terms of, it's very hard to replace. But at the same time, we have, with cement, you have the problem of there is a chemical reaction that does release that CO2 when you heat the limestone. So even if you could deal with the fossil fuel problem, how do you deal with the CO2 coming from cement?
So in short, to replacing the fossil fuel, we replace it by waste, and we already have a couple of plants in the world that are running with a 100% replacement. So we know how to do that very well. When it comes to the rest, you have two big options. The first one is when you heat up the limestones, it becomes what we call clinker, and the clinker is mixed with other things to become the cement. These other things, well, some of it is coming directly from Irina. She gives me her slag, her byproduct. So it's one of the options. So thank you very much, Irina. Keep sending it to me, please. We can also get fly ash, which is a byproduct from the coal industry, but we also have calcined clay, which is natural minerals, etc. And that allows to reduce the clinker factor. We already have some cements that have a clinker factor in the single digit. We have masonry cement with clinker factor of the 20%. So depending on your usage of the cement, you can already have super low CO2 cement. Our average company clinker factor is 70%. So as you see, we have already made some progress. But there will be a moment where we will hit a wall because we are not going to have zero clinker cement. And at least today, the innovation has not shown us we could do it. We are working on it, but as you are very rightly saying, Sherif, it's a quantity problem. So we might be able to do it for some niche product, for some niche application, but for the millions of tons that are necessary every year, it will be more complicated. So the next holy grail will be carbon capture. Today, carbon capture is not on our roadmap for 2030 because we are fully understanding that it requires more innovation work in terms of scalability, innovation, and even cost. But past 2030, progressively, we will need to start having carbon capture in our plants.
And that's what was very interesting here is that there's you have the short term where you can start reducing the clinker factor and then reducing the emissions as part of that. But then there is that almost the need for carbon capture in the future because of that very the essence of the reaction at the heart of cement making that builds that need. It's very interesting as well, kind of having that connection between the steel, the slag, the byproduct going and contributing to reduce emissions elsewhere. That's extremely interesting. Irina, in steel, obviously there's kind of, because as there's been a lot of movement, obviously there's an increase in steel recycling and use of electric arc furnaces, which has a much lower emissions. Where do you see that going in the future in terms of the proportion of steel being produced in that way?
That's a good question. Thanks, Sherif. I think steel making carbon neutral is complex and will cost billions of euros. And to transform our operations to become carbon neutral, we really need to move from the primary steel production away from reliance on fossil fuel energy and towards the clean energy. And we really focused on 3 forms of clean energy. It's really clean electricity, circular carbon, and carbon capture and storage that Magali was also referring to. And within ArcelorMittal, we are pursuing 2 breakthrough carbon neutral technology routes. The first one is what we call smart carbon, and the second one is innovative DRI-based route. I think both routes will benefit from a shift towards hydrogen in the long term, but I think in the midterm, and I think the technology I described, Darero and Carbalis, those are indeed the smart carbon route. And it's, those technologies are complementary. So we start from, kind of moving away from the fossil coal to bio-coal in order to reduce iron ore in the blast furnace, and then we capture the gases to produce bioethanol. If we start with the plastic waste, we can actually achieve a circular economy, and then the remaining CO2 can be captured through the carbon capture process as well. So I think that's one route. Innovative DRI will involve, of course, hydrogen. I think we all talk about hydrogen now, but we know some challenges associated with this. It's both economical and technological, but we do believe that, and I think a lot of efforts are now put in order to really make it sustainable in the long term.
So what's super interesting is that the last just 10 minutes we talked about so many different technologies from new kind of material optimization to carbon capture and storage to sort of new ways of electrifying production of things that had normally not been electrified, and all of those are some of these technologies are things that are available today. Others are things that will still need years of development. And so what's would be really interesting to hear from you is, to what extent do you see these things, and kind of where do you see the difference between things being developed internally, and obviously Lafarge and ArcelorMittal are huge companies, and to what extent do you use do you work sort of externally? To what extent do you also outsource or kind of look at the outside to collaboratively develop some of these technologies and these solutions? Perhaps maybe if Magali, you could start.
So as you saw, my role is Chief Sustainability and Innovation Officer. So innovation is at the heart of everything we do in sustainability. I mean, more than 50% of what we do in innovation is already towards sustainability, low carbon cement, etc. We have today products on the market, such as EcoPact, that have up to more than 70% reduction of CO2, and we even offer compensation to go to neutrality. So we have all of this. But you're right, it's not good enough. It's not good enough because I think open source is very important. And I know for a company like ours, it's not that obvious, because you would think that we are a super traditional big company with a big R&D center. So why would we look for open source? And we have several avenues. We have Plant of Tomorrows, where we work with startups to look at how to be more efficient, automation, artificial intelligence, and you name it. But we also have something called LH Maker, where we look at the digital space, and LH Accelerator. And the accelerator is really where the innovation team works with startups from quite an early age to help them develop. And sometimes if one becomes good, we might decide to invest in it. But there is really the innovation support there that is so important. I would just name one that was part of our 2018 session, which is called Carbon Cure, which I think most people now have heard of because it has become so famous since Bill Gates decided to invest in it. So I make a call here to Bill Gates. If you want to find some startups, come to me. I will give you some names. But joke apart, if I tell you the word hackathon, would you put you together with cement? I guess you wouldn't. But we have done something like in the year and a half, we've done 3 hackathons. The last one was on 3D printing. So I think all of us, we need to be out there with an open mind that your innovation will certainly come from someone outside your full network.
And if anyone, if Bill Gates or anyone who knows Bill Gates is in the audience, please tell him to watch this. Magali, what about ArcelorMittal? And you know, obviously XCAR is you know, that you talked about is probably a huge step in this direction, but it would be great to know where you see external collaboration as well in terms of innovation.
Absolutely, I think I fully agree with Magali that technology innovation is paramountly important in achieving the climate goals. And while we do have a lot of talented specialists in our research and development centers, and our CTO team is incredibly experienced and very much focused on developing potentially game-changing technologies to decarbonize the steel making, I think this alone is not enough to achieve what we aspire to achieve in carbon neutrality by 2050, if not earlier. Therefore, as a result, we launched XCAR Innovation Fund to really identify some of the promising technologies that can support us on the journey to carbon neutrality. I'm very pleased to say that, you know, we have met a lot of interesting and fascinating companies developing you know, a number of, I think, actually complementary technologies on all fronts. If you look at the steel production process, you know, we are looking at hydrogen, we are looking at the renewable energy, we are looking again at using the biomass, at the carbon capture. And I'm also pleased to announce that we have made the first investment, which we announced last week. It's a company focused on the concentrated solar power. And one point I would like to add is, unlike some other funds, which are really focused from the, you know, identifying those companies and investing in them, what we do, we support those companies not only with the investment, but also with the possibility to use ArcelorMittal as a platform to try and test their technologies in order to establish their technical viability and industrial scalability. And I think this is, I think Magali used that word in one of our discussions. It's a great playground, and we provide a unique platform for those companies to actually establish this. Because, you know, one thing is technology working at the lab, but then it's completely different ball game, you know, for the steel and cement industry to really make the technology work on the industrial scale.
It's incredibly exciting, because I think, hearing from both of you, because we have two of the largest industries in the world, and you know, the largest companies in those industries in the world, and the sort of that change from, you know, kind of the thinking that people think, yeah, these are more traditional industries, you know, cement and steel are made in the way they've always been made, and kind of seeing all of that movement towards innovating, changing every part of it, whether it's from the software to the equipment to the energy use, the energy that's being used, and you know, starting to look at investing and supporting. And essentially, as you're saying, we perhaps, as both of you said, sort of being the partner that allows some of these ideas to come out of the lab and be trialed and experimented and trialed in the real world it's incredibly exciting. And I would imagine that this will lead to an acceleration of some of these solutions that then would have happened otherwise. And that's why, sort of at the beginning, I was saying, you know, if you're here at CogX and you think, okay, where technology innovation is happening, it's not going to be in cement and steel. I think this is going to be a place where we see a whole lot of innovation happening, and many solutions that then will be applicable to other sectors in coming years. So you know, and we've been talking about the opportunities so far, and the opportunities are partly driven by the pressure, and the pressure is coming from, obviously, the pressure to meet net zero targets, whether among countries or for companies. But with all of that, and despite all of the energy and sort of all of the will and the commitments that are being made, there are barriers. There are real barriers in reality to getting to net zero for the steel and cement industries. I would perhaps just wanted to ask you both, what do you see as the one or two biggest barriers that cement or steel face?
When you say both, you have to say a name because we don't know who talks first.
Oh, okay. Well, Magali, do you want to go first?
So, well, I don't know if we call them barriers, you can call them enabling factors, etc., etc. But at the end, there's not a single company or a single sector that can do it by itself. You have to look at the entire value chain, and you have to look at everything. So if I start with the products, I mentioned EcoPact. We launched that almost a year ago now, the biggest brand of green concrete that exists in the world. I would love to be sitting here and telling you this was such a fantastic commercial success. We sold so much of it. We are such a successful company now. Well, we are a successful company, but today, unfortunately, not because of EcoPact. So why is the reaction so timid? It's because today the incentive to use green products is not yet there, and in most countries, including in Europe, is not yet there. So we really struggle to sell it, even though this green concrete, which lowers my scope 1, is someone else's scope 3 that Irina was talking about earlier. So you would think people would jump on it, but it's not the case. Another example, I have a cement here in Switzerland, which includes 20% of recycled construction and demolition waste. So basically you have a building, end of life, you break it down, and then you grind it and put it back straight in the cement. So circularity is the best way to not use resources. So climate change wise is fantastic. Well, it's only 20%. Why? Because the norm stops me from going further. Even if the science tells me that I could go further now, I'm not blaming Switzerland because it's actually the only country where I can sell it, where the norm accepts it. So today, I think we have a real problem of innovation is evolving super fast, as we all know, but norms are not necessarily following the pace. And I'm not blaming the norms because I think norms are incredibly important. We absolutely want the bridge that is made of concrete to hold and not collapse. Everyone understands that. But it's really important to work with a scientific to make sure that we follow it, because if not, we can make, all the companies can make all the effort in the world to create all these products, but if people don't have incentive or the norm don't allow them to sell them, then it's a complete waste of time. And I will touch just in one word, as the rest of the value chain, I think today I sell concrete and people look at my CO2 per cubic meter. The day we start talking about CO2 per square meter of building, then we start talking about design and so on, where all the actors are being involved, including us. And we don't have that discussion as of today. And I think that would be super important that the entire value chain sits around the table and have that discussion on how to lower overall the carbon of the fully built items, infrastructure, building, etc.
And there's some really important issues there, because one is that how the whole ecosystem works together. It's just not just the emission from cement or the emission from steel, but also what happens on the construction site, how much efficiency there's there, how much material is being ordered and used or not used, and also goes back to the design of buildings and how do you make that as efficient as possible. And that point about the where the norms are and where the standards are that you have to follow is, I trained as a civil engineer, and the thing that's just drilled into you like all day long at university is that you have to have you have to over design for safety. So you build the safety margins, and then you assume certain qualities, and then you put on top lots of percentages on top of that, so that it's like and you end up with something that's twice as strong as it needs to be. But also everybody is absolutely terrified of not doing that. And I'm wondering, and because it's something that if it goes wrong, then the building collapses, then people buy. So how do you go past that? And kind of maybe one thing I'm wondering is the change of technology we've had in the last 10, 20 years or so with sensors, with AI, all of that, does it allow us to perhaps change this too? But maybe Magali will.
We're so polite here until you call our name, Sherif. We don't know.
I know. It's just because I'm looking at you, right? But it's through the screen, but you don't know that.
I think in general, at the end, it's normal to have a safety margin. Of course, everyone wants a safety margin. That makes total sense. And again, I'm an engineer. Everything I do is scientific and rigorous. But there is a difference between a safety margin due to scientific reason for people who know what they are doing, and which can be a panel of experts, etc., and someone putting extra margin for the sake of covering their bottom part, not to say a bad word, which is sometimes what you see happening. And again, when you look at the design, we are talking today concrete and concrete quantity. Concrete is about 25% of the CO2 of a building. We could reduce the quantity of concrete by a different design, and that's okay. But then, because you want to incentivize that, because again, everyone needs to be happy and incentivized, then you have to do it in such a way that you measure performance and not volume. So you need to move from being a commoditized volume industry to a performance high-level product industry, and that shift has to happen. And when it will happen, then we will have much better way of selling our green products, and even if it's much less quantity, we'll still be very happy.
Right. So it's very much okay. So it's moving from volume to performance. Irina, where I mean, what do you see as barriers? What are things that you wish were different, or that if they were different could really start accelerating that transition in steel?
I think that there are a number of challenges, of course, in achieving what we want to achieve. I would focus on two. One is, of course, from the technology perspective, finding that optimal route to really produce steel in a carbon neutral manner. And the second one is, of course, economical and policy related challenge. So how do you, even if you get technologically to produce a carbon neutral steel, at this currently there are quite enormous green premiums related to this. So how do you bridge this gap, and who's going to pay those green premiums? So some of those challenges are quite important to address, and I think again we are pleased to see that there are a number of customers that are ready to pay the green premiums. But of course, if you look at the commodity world, this bridge still needs to be this gap still needs to be bridged, and it has to come through the investments and again the appropriate regulatory framework. I think that's quite important.
And what's very interesting in what you're raising, Irina, is that looking at other sectors, so looking at renewable energy, whether it was feed-in tariffs for solar power, for example, or the government grants for electric vehicles, any new all these clean technologies that have been coming through have had that support at the policy level early on to enable that the early adoption and the increase in volumes, which then kind of helps drives costs lower, so that they become the norm. And I guess, I mean, if we're looking here at two industries, cement and steel, that represent something like 15% or more of global emissions. If we've done this for the power sector and for the transportation sector, then why are we not doing it for cement and steel? And it's a question, and I think the conversation is changing, but just from your experience, is it this idea that there are hard to abate sectors? So almost, some people have said, okay, well, this is too hard, so we're just going to focus on the things that seem easier and then leave those and then come back to them, or is it just that that attention in terms of support mechanisms for the greenification, for the move to lower carbon steel and cement just hasn't happened yet?
I think there are a number of areas. Oh, sorry. Yeah.
No, please go ahead.
I think there are a number of areas, and what I've seen is there are fragmented efforts into incentivizing the industry. Again, I've seen a lot of focus on hydrogen from the policymakers. But if you look at the midterm, again, I was saying that we believe that other ways of getting to carbon neutrality are more achievable and economically sustainable in the midterm, but we don't see enough incentives from the policymakers in order to achieve that. So it's again, I think it entails, and what you correctly said is, I see and this is exciting. I see a lot of global commitment. I think there is realization more than I've ever seen that this needs to happen. This is something that we need to start running as fast as we can in order to achieve. So there is a global commitment from pretty much everyone I've seen in order to achieve that. But it's really collaboration and talking together to understand what is this efficient way, because there again, it's not just one technology or one solution that will solve it all. I think it's a number of steps, a number of technologies, and we need to work with the scientists, with the companies to really understand what is the most optimal way and how the governments and policymakers should incentivize and put the right regulatory framework in place in order to do it in the most smooth and sustainable way.
Thank you, and absolutely agree with that. Magali, what have you seen? Have you seen any changes in the last couple of years, for example, on any movement on the policy level, on the discussions at least in terms of supporting the transition in cement?
Well, I mean, we have seen a lot of changes. I think everyone have seen that in the last 2 years on, what the external world thinks of decarbonization and why it's so important. You talk about stakeholders, we talk about Greta Thunberg, you talk about shareholders and all this. I think we have seen that. On the policy, I think it's a bit slow. Having said that, we start seeing initiatives that are very interesting. For example, the city of Los Angeles declared that starting this summer, they will ask for EPD, Environmental Product Declaration, which looks at the total life cycle assessment of any product they use for any of their public tenders. And when you think that about 40% of the cement is used for infrastructure, which is public tenders, it's actually not that complicated to start introducing immediately those requirements. And if you think of all the stimulus that are happening at the moment with infrastructure development, et cetera, it's actually something that could be put in place almost immediately and everywhere, and wouldn't that be complicated? So I can't say I've really seen it, but you still have the EU Green Deal and so on, and we are still waiting to see what this will mean in terms of rules and the standards, etc. So I'm quite hopeful it will happen, because those are the type of actions that can be taken super quickly. Now, the ones that are much longer term, which are about carbon capture, usage and storage, and developing infrastructure that companies can truly do it without going bankrupt the next day, that's the one where we see some timid announcements, such as countries announcing they will invest so much and so on. But that's one where I think that we require much more push from legislation and governments.
And maybe something to take out of this conversation is that where there is something, obviously there is a lot of fantastic innovation happening in the sector, and that's only going to grow, but that needs to be supported by the right policy frameworks. And this is a place where also innovation could be really important. Having that policy innovation, those forums to get those ideas from different countries and different even localities and cities to be discussed and repeated elsewhere where they're successful could make a big difference. Now, we're almost out of time, so we have less than 3 minutes. So I wanted to ask you one last question each, perhaps briefly. And as this is kind of the big question at CogX this year, if we want to get the next 10 years right, what do we need to do? Magali, do you want to go?
No, I think we just need to have the entire sectors and the built environment, which is what's my priority. We need a built environment to work together in the entire value chain and to have the right incentives so that decarbonizing is better than not decarbonizing. And I'm not joking. Sometimes the incentives actually are the contrary. And we need to have that now. We just can't wait. Having said that, the good news is all the stars are aligned. There is the public opinion, the shareholders, your kids, my kids, everything is aligned. So it's the right time to do it. And if we don't do it, it would be criminal.
Thank you very much, Magali. Irina.
Yes, if you were to ask me this question a year ago, I would say, getting the buy-in from the management and employees of our company in order to really be focused on how we achieve our climate goals. But I'm so excited to say that once we have announced our XCAR brand, I've seen so much excitement within the group, and I can see how everyone is very much focused. I think this brought together our company, and everyone is really focused on how they can achieve it, how you can integrate those climate goals in the way we really conduct the business. I mean, it's a shift in the business model, and I'm really pleased to see that everyone got very excited. So I think this is to the point of Magali on star alignment. I think everyone is now committed. Everyone is clear that this needs to happen, this must happen, and it's really, again, I would say, around collaboration. I think I've seen one of the questions around, should the kids be educated about it? My answer would be, by all means. I think, I would introduce it in schools, really, to be, educated on the climate change and importance of, both behavioral shift and really changing our daily habits in order to live more sustainably and achieve the climate goals.
So perhaps as final takeaways, we have there's education about knowing how to live sustainably, and about having creating the right incentives to accelerate the transition to zero carbon, but also to incentivize decarbonization rather than the opposite. I want to just take a moment to say thank you so much, Irina. Thank you so much, Magali. It's absolutely amazing to have leaders like you in these industries, really driving innovation, driving sustainability, and really taking very, very real and concrete steps and making things happen on the ground. That's extremely important. And as you said, I said, talked about, Magali was saying, and Irina talking about children and the future. And if we are to get the 10 years right, that's exactly what we need. We need people doing the action in the right places and moving the industry forward, moving the industry towards decarbonization. Thank you so much. Absolute pleasure to have you both.
Thank you.